I am so excited for this conversation with you, Yancey. Thank you for being here. You've had such an incredible journey. So, author, entrepreneur, thought leader, co founder of Kickstarter, creator of Bentoism. I'm a huge fan of your work and the ideas that you're putting out into the world. And I don't know if you remember when I reached out in December 2019, I had just heard you on a podcast, which was honestly the best podcast episode that I'd heard in a really long time. And I was literally exclaiming yes out loud throughout the podcast as you were talking about your book and the ideas within your book. Because you were saying things that had been circling around in my mind for a long time, but you were saying them in such an articulate way and clear way. And I think that I know it's the type of thinking that we need in the world right now. So I thank you for the book you put out there. And we'll get to that a little bit later. But coming to the Purpose and Profit podcast, I couldn't think of a better guest than you to have on this and the work that you're putting out in the world right now. But before we get to your book, I would love to dive into Kickstarter first, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. And thanks for inviting me. And those are a lot of really nice things you said. And yeah, thank you. So yeah, Kickstarter, sure. Let's talk about it.
So, for those who don't know Kickstarter, the mission is helping bring creative projects to life. And from early on in your book, you also mentioned that the goal of Kickstarter was to make something that mattered and do it for the long haul. And definitely got aces across the board on that and staying true to that mission. As of, I think, the end of 2019, Kickstarter had funded 500,000 projects, helped bring them to life. Now, going back to the start of Kickstarter, I would love to hear what was important to you as you built a culture.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think there's a mix of intentionality and unintentional things that create a culture. Um, like the first thing that comes to mind are just experiences. I'd never like run my own company before, but I'd been a worker bee in plenty of companies before. And I had in my head like just things I would never do if I were ever the boss. I would never call a surprise all hands. I would never like just ways I knew that you could feel anxious, be made to feel anxious in an organization, or the way that an organization could just not understand the actual needs. And so I really started from that place and how I thought about things, and very much feeling like, the kid that gets to be in charge of the class or something, like, but really wanting to like do honor, do justice by it. And so that was important. And then I think, you know, the three founders of Kickstarter, myself, Perry Chin, Charles Adler, we're all three like individuals with our own, ways of doing things. And coming together, it created a culture where, we thought very deeply about our decisions. We would second guess ourselves a lot, not in like the deeper ways, but just always kind of checking whether we were doing something because it felt like we were expected to do it, or if we were doing something because we felt passionate about it.
Mm.
And there was a lot of energy, a lot of calories burned on those kinds of questions, where often it would be there's a certain way that companies tend to send emails. Like one I remember is like, whether you opt in someone to like a social feature or you opt them out as a default, and these kinds of decisions where the default is that the company is going to do whatever is in their self-interest, and they are going to maximize and exploit that customer to whatever degree they can until the math tells them it is unprofitable for them. And, we just thought, let's not really optimize any of these things. And let's think more about what creates trust. And so there's a whole culture then that comes about because of that. And so a lot of those things, you just do stuff, and 3 years later you wake up and find out what it manifested, and there's some things that you could be intentional about. And certainly, in the projects I'm working on now, I bring in a greater awareness of having seen the degree to which things get baked in. But to a large part, it's just how things happen and how you respond to things that happen, what norms get set, and then a whole universe gets created off of that.
Ugh, I think that's so beautiful. And there's a couple things you said that really stuck out, which are, I mean, all three of you and the other two co founders were kind of new to business, right? As far as running one.
Yeah, we're more creative people than business people for sure. Yeah.
I think that's a huge benefit when you then are intentional about, is this something we think we should be doing when running a business? Like, this is what people who run business do. Or is this something that we really want to be doing? Is this the way we want it to be operating? And actually challenging the status quo, because oftentimes the status quo isn't very healthy. It just exists because it has existed before, not because it's the best way forward.
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of like there's like a competency minimum that you must reach for these sorts of things to matter. So it's like, it's good, for the for Perry, 6, 7+ years that we as creative people were trying and failing to launch a technology company. Not being an engineer, not having some of those other skills felt like, this is really painful and this might really cost us. Um, that dynamic changed in large part actually because the technology stacks that we could use to build a website changed during that period of time. During those years, Amazon EC2 and AWS became available, different payment systems that we could implement. And so instead we could we were one of the earlier products of like stacking together these other pieces of the tech stack. And so that, because there was that technical competency that had been reached in part by things happening at other companies, then we could kind of be a post-tech company where our core competency didn't have to be in what it is to like put a website up. It could be in developing a culture, developing a customer base, developing a cultural imprint. But if I were to try to start a factory right now, all of my whatever my creative beliefs might be, if I'm making art, sure, maybe that works. But at other things, there's just that competency you have to reach. So where we are fortunate is that especially in technology areas of business, a lot of the hard stuff is really kind of, like the real capital intensive infrastructure stuff is just there for you. And you can really be a post tech entrepreneur and have all of these tools at your disposal, and then optimize for other things on top. But you can't do that in every field. You can't do that in every field. And there is this, there is a base level of, are you providing value to other people, that is the bedrock of anything.
Absolutely. That value piece is huge. And I think sometimes it gets lost in especially companies that have been really successful in the past, of the what is it for? Like, what are you actually doing? You're there in service of whoever your customers are and providing value to them.
But even who your customer is has probably changed from what it was at the beginning. I mean, these are hard things to hold on to. And the businesses that do last, it's there's great, like the Jim Collins books, Good to Great and Built to Last, are really great at talking about these things. But there is definitely a sense of, to put it in the language of Bentoism, the tool that I use, the framework that I use now. I think these are companies that operate with a strong vision of future me, this like idealized, this legacy version of themselves. Like I think Apple thinks in terms of like the legacy of Apple, and everything should be an Apple product. And there's all those words are gleaming, and very expensive font. And so there is this notion of, yes, we have to provide a day-to-day service. There's inns in Japan that have been around for 1,000 years, and they have to provide clean beds and these things every day. But what allows you to do that over the long term is to have a different kind of horizon, a horizon of, are we meeting some expectation? Are we fulfilling some larger purpose? Is there an ideal? And those are things that you constantly have to renew in yourself. These missions and the language of a mission, they have eras. It's like outfits will only work for so long, and they have to update based on the language and how the culture has changed. But the core of it, the core theory or like thesis of why this exists, has to stay consistent. And those are hard, those are hard things, because they require a real level of introspection and an ability to communicate, and an ability to like hold a myth among a group of people, and to do it over, across generations. Like there are generations of employees. Today an employee generation lasts about 18 months or 2 years, and each new group coming in, they're coming into a new normal of what that company is. And so to be able to maintain a consistent thread through those things is incredibly valuable and not easy to do.
Yeah, it's like a living organism that
Yeah, for sure.
goes through different phases that aren't always expected.
Yeah,
Just
yeah,
like a living organism.
yeah, 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 for sure, for sure.
um, Now, one thing Kickstarter did, which I think is beautiful, was deciding to become a benefit corporation. And Kickstarter is one of the best known companies that has done that. And for the listeners that don't know what a benefit corporation is, it's actually a legal entity where the company has responsibility not just to shareholders, but to their customers, their employees, their suppliers, their community, and their environment. And they report on these metrics yearly to ensure that they are maintaining, looking after all of those stakeholders. Um, so I would love to hear a little bit about the journey of Kickstarter becoming a benefit corporation. Like, why did you choose to do this, and what was the benefit for Kickstarter?
Yeah, well, it's just to introduce more confusion to this conversation. There are two distinct things here. There's a public benefit corporation as a legal framework, where you incorporate and you write a charter whereby you declare the public benefit your company will produce. And the legal requirement of a PBC is that your shareholder goals and your public benefit goals are basically held as a dual purpose. It's not like we make as much money as we can and then we give a lot of money to charity afterwards. Instead, it's like these things are one to one.
That's
Now
beautiful.
there's another form of a B Corp, which is also part of what you mentioned, where you have you're assessed according to a score each year, and you get a label you can put on your product, with like the little B on it. And those things are distinct, because the B Corp, sort of logo, that is like validating your current practices and saying, yes, you are fulfilling like this threshold of being a good company. As a PBC, that actually limits your future decisions. It binds your future decisions, to say we must always follow these certain principles. As a B Corp, you could theoretically lose it at any point. But as a PBC, it's a legal structure. For us, this came from legacy type thinking. And the core values and expectations about what was right or wrong for the business that we held, a lot of them weren't written down. They were held by us as founders. There are things that everyone understood, but we just started to see that we hope that Kickstarter lasts long enough that it outlives, say, us founders. Um, and you can't just rely on a company to be run by good people, quote unquote, good
Mm.
people. And even people who think they're good people, you can't rely on that for them to make sound decisions. And so if we were to imagine, Kickstarter is an entity that outlives us, then we should try to be clear about what's important and how this company should behave. And these shouldn't just be like slogans on a cafeteria wall. These should be binding. And so we learned about the structure of the PBC, which had just been created around the same time. So we started looking into it the second it happened. And and yeah, and through there found this new corporation type that is trying to imagine and design a future beyond shareholder maximization as driving the economy. So now there are, I believe, about 5,000 PBCs in the US. The form exists in other countries as well. And I don't think that I think the end goal should be that the PBC model becomes a norm, and actually that it almost um, like acquires the C Corp model. I don't want it to be that like the good companies do the PBC thing. It's just that culture moves to such a degree that all companies realize they must make these kinds of commitments, and that there's a level of accountability for them. Now that might be asking for a lot, and there's going to probably need to be more government intervention for that to truly happen. But I think challenges like the climate are going to force that, and experiences like COVID have certainly opened up all of our ideas to like a different kind of matrix of decisions and players, as we're our world that was on autopilot went to its crashing halt. And I think it's given us time to re-examine a lot of things. So I think this is an area where um, there's a lot of nice company advertising saying that they care. And I think structures and pressure are what can make that even more real.
100%. Um, I also hope it becomes the default instead of the way companies are currently run. And you see, interestingly, I don't pressure is not the right word, but influence coming from spaces you wouldn't maybe typically expect, like Larry Fink saying that who is the CEO of BlackRock, the largest management fund in the world, saying that they um, assess companies on social and environmental impact as well, because that proves long-term profitability. Like it
But
de-risks investments. It's actually good for shareholders as well.
just today, the former head of ESG investment for BlackRock wrote an op-ed in USA Today saying the whole ESG thing is a sham and that it's doing nothing to help the environment, and like wrote this scathing thing attacking BlackRock for in the whole space of how finance is using ESGs. So I think there's a question about
Hmm.
how sincere any of that is. There are lots of reasons to be optimistic, and I think really the people who can apply pressure are employees and consumers. Elites are captured, like they profit from this world. They've created the pollution of this world, and there's little incentive for them to change in many ways unless pressure is created. I mean, Greta Thunberg has been a perfect innocent,
Mm-hmm.
and that was what it took to break through and to see the innocence of children for whom they can't outrun what's being left for them. And so I think that the pressure today is from employees and is from the bottom. And I think that, in the US with the Biden administration, I think there's a president that is actually might be more interested in hearing those voices than those on the top, certainly more so than we've seen in a long time. And the truth is that where a lot of people are coming to is to see that decarbonization is going to be immensely profitable. You're going to be able to make a lot of money rewiring and rebuilding everything in the world. Like literally that has to happen. Literally that has to happen. And so that is going to be a huge boom. And so it's kind of, I think that a lot of the decarbonization, a lot of the things that we need to see happen for the climate, I think a lot of those things will happen partially out of necessity, but probably just as much because it is a way to keep the money wheel spinning. And so, yeah, but I don't know. I think that employees pushing their companies to be more real, and being more real means don't make a pledge to be carbon neutral by 2050. Make a pledge to have something done by 2025, by 2030. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I interviewed the journalist David Wallace Wells, who wrote The Uninhabitable Earth recently, and I asked him how he knows whether a climate pledge is real. And he said how soon it is. If it's soon, then it's something real. If it's 2050, it's probably nothing. And so that's, employees should push their CEOs. They should ask those questions in the all hands, and consumers should voice those things too.
That's a great point. And consumers are voicing it more. They are choosing companies that are conscious, and they're skeptical, as they should be, because a lot of companies do just put a slogan up and say that they're doing good, but the track record doesn't meet the slogan or live up to it.
Yeah, there's going to be, I think consumers are choose the brands that have the slogans that say it's better, because of course people have a genuine desire. Like, people don't want to be harmful. The climate change is not an issue of personal morality. It's an issue of the infrastructure on which our society has been built, and our refusal to confront that because of its ultimate inconvenience. Decarbonizing the world, fixing climate change the world, will improve most people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
It's really only like the top 1% that would go from having extraordinarily comfortable lives, they would go to having very comfortable lives. Like, legit. Like, I think everyone else could have, for the most part, an improvement in their quality of life. And it's a very achievable project. It is an achievable project. Um, but it's not any of our individual morality. People are trying to do these things, but ultimately these avenues are being presented by this product instead of that product. They are perpetuating the same machine. They're not addressing the problem. And so that's the real issue. So that intent is there, but that intent is being fed a false signal. We're a rat being made to push the button to be given sugar water, and we think we're doing something good. The button has stop climate change on it. We're like, great, we're doing it, and the other one says, keep having climate change. That's about the extent of it, I think, right now.
I think that also goes back to the importance of movements like the Public Benefit Corporation and B Corp, because there is some sort of external checking and validation that the things a company is saying it is doing, and on another side there is legal binding to actually be considering those other stakeholders instead of just considering it when it's convenient.
Yeah, I mean, I think of like laws can set directions, like, and they can define and shape markets. Laws can also be, I sometimes think that at its best, capitalism will create a race to the top of, I'm trying to make my product better than your product. And, we're competing to outdo each other in the eyes of a consumer.
Mm-hmm.
That is like the perfect law of competition. And the way that, so that can work, on a high end. The issue is that there will still be all these externalities, side effects, like overuse of materials, destruction of biodiversity, poor
Mm-hmm.
wages, all these sorts of things. And so what's needed is you have the race to the top to like raise the bar for a market, and then you have to have the state and slash like the professional associations of those spaces constantly raising the floor through laws, and just like, we got to cut out these kinds of practices from here on out, and
Mm-hmm.
just, and really advocating for that, and keeping our industries clean through like great competition that inspires all kinds of great behavior, and then having the same attitude of like, let's raise the floor to know, to block out these things that are really problematic. And um, So yeah, there's these like push and pulls, but laws and legal infrastructure are the ultimate. It is the ultimate expression of a norm, and without that, you are ultimately relying on culture and social expectations to guide behavior, which is powerful and as it
Mm-hmm.
should be. Like laws shouldn't govern so many areas of our lives. Like laws should have no part in. Um, but yeah, they are without a law. It's probably a state is probably temporary in terms of how things are currently being done or what its intentions are or what the vibe is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it can have a good, I guess, check and balance once culture, consumers, and employees have said, this is what we want, this is where we
Yeah,
want to be. And we want to raise the level of excellence of our organizations, not just in the things we make and delighting consumers, but in the way we're building them and the way we're sourcing stuff in all areas, raising the level of excellence.
yeah, and like kind of fulfilling what we've been sold as what these companies are, which are like these efficient machines of like incredible ingenuity, right? And it's like, great, that's awesome. Let's apply that everywhere. Let's apply that everywhere, not just in the ways that are profitable to you. And and yeah, we get that that's not how it's been done for the last 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
But guess what? It's a new world. Like how many other things in your business are done the way they were done 50 years ago? Like give us a break.
Right.
Um, and so it's just where it is now. And so I think that I'm optimistic about most of these things. I mean, I think that companies are going to have to be forced to be honest, and everyone's going to be self-serving. But I also think that for companies starting now, like it's obvious that if you're going to be successful, you're going to be in a crowded space with other players. And so you have to define your identity and to define who you are and who you aren't. And in every category, like there is a low price leader and there is a like most loved in the eyes of the consumer leader, which generally has to do with values
Mm-hmm.
and non-selfish thinking on behalf of the company. Like we don't think of Amazon as an example of this, but like Amazon's whole thing of being the most customer-centric company in the world, where like there's an empty chair in meetings to represent the customer, and like this is their edge and how they compete with others is they don't put their strategy is not to put their own interests first. Their strategy is to put the customer's interests first because that ultimately serves Amazon in the end. And so for companies starting now, they can see that to be the whatever player, the more conscious player, or to be the one that speaks to a certain segment of the audience or that represents a certain set of values, are spaces to carve out, our space, our opportunities, and are things that you have to do early to be taken seriously. And so I think it's gone from like a maybe 5% of startups have some sense of purpose beyond the goal of the business, and now I think that's that might be half of them have something like that. And I think that number is just going to keep going up, and every category is going to be competitive with these kinds of values and signals and ways of distinguishing their product, their offer versus someone else's.
Absolutely. I mean, purpose has the power to do such incredible things for business. To be a top talent magnet, because we all want a paycheck that supports our families, but we also want our career to be more than a means to an end. And if you can work for somewhere that you're excited about what they're doing and they're creating positive change, that brings a whole different level of talent to your organization and excitement around innovating and keeping your company ahead of the competition as well.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
So now I would love to talk about your book. This could be our future, a manifesto for a more generous world. Amazing. So any listeners that haven't read it should go out and buy it immediately. And to give a little snippet of what the book is about, I'm actually going to paraphrase something that you said, if you don't mind. You said in the book, this book is about a simple idea. that a world of scarcity can become a world of abundance if we accept a broader definition of value. We recognize that there are so many valuable things in life: love, community, safety, knowledge, and faith, just to name a few. But we allow just one value, money, to dominate everything. Our potential for a more generous, moral, or fair society is limited by the dominance of money as the end all be all, and it puts a ceiling on what we can be. And then you say, as Maslow's, I always get his name is hard for me, as Maslow's hierarchy of needs makes clear, when we when the accrual of wealth becomes the point of life, we limit ourselves. Money makes the world go round, but only at a fraction of its potential. It isn't the highest we can go. As long as financial maximization is our focus, the biggest payoffs will remain disappointingly out of reach. I think that is so beautiful and so well said, and such a true and important message. And I think most people inherently know that that's true, that money isn't the end all be all, that at some point it isn't going to bring happiness or success once it has your basic needs met.
Yeah, I think almost all individuals, not almost all, the majority of individuals, I think have a good handle on that. That we try to satisfy our needs, and then we sort of optimize for things we love. Maybe some people love money, or they love the competition of it, or things like that. But the issue is that the systems at the heart of society and our scoreboard for what we keep track of as a society, all of that is tracked in dollars, and it ultimately forces everything to contort itself through this window of price and what can be bought or sold, or what can be financially valued. And so anything that is not financially valued is invisible and is thus vulnerable and is likely being exploited. And you end up building an entire society that just reflects the needs of money, because at the end, that is what everything is trading in. And so this has really happened, taken over the US since the 1970s, has been just this increasing financialization of all aspects of its economy, of its society. And, we can see the fraying of social bonds, the people having less, working at their jobs not as long, having less ties in their community, increases in loneliness, increases in despair. All these kinds of things are ultimately tracked to, well, we focused on growing one particular metric that had all sorts of side effects that we told ourselves, or we were told, that if we just made enough money, those things would just go away, which might be possible, but if that was a sincere attempt, and it just hasn't, it has not been a working, functioning structure, and it has ultimately produced climate change. It's ultimately produced climate change because this is built on the back of energy, on the back of short-term, cheap, long-term, extraordinarily expensive energy. And so we're now facing a kind of a reckoning where our one singular metric of dollars cannot solve the challenges that we face now. It has created challenges that it does not know what to do with, like social despair, like onlineness, like all kinds of things. And so now, what's happening for older generations, they are totally befuddled by this moment and don't know what to do. But for younger generations, it's clear. It's just like, hey, there's more to the picture than this. There is this financial base that is important. So we should have a basic income. I should be able to get a good job. Like the minimum wage should be able to provide for me the necessities of life. But I want to be liberated to do all kinds of things. I want to be creative. I want to explore knowledge. I want to be with people. I want to manifest a larger version of me. I want to be in a community with others. Like that is what like the people of today are crying out for. And and they want to do all that on the back of, let me have just security. Let me know that I'm not like destitute. Let me know that I'm not an accident away from my life falling apart. And other than that, just like, man, there's so many things I would love to do. And so the value system has changed, and there's an argument to say that, capitalism got us to a point where money has become, especially in the years since COVID, like there's trillions of dollars just created in the economy in the past year, where there now is like, money is not a scarce good. I mean, it still is for a significant portion of Americans, but for less than was a year ago. And our relationship to money is changing. But what needs to happen, and what is happening simultaneously, is that other values rise in importance. So decarbonization rising in importance. In the case of COVID, like social distancing or lowering the curve of COVID cases rising in importance. Our dashboards are going to become more complicated. It's not going to be only dollars anymore, and it's going to be dollars plus CO2 plus probably unemployment plus job displacement plus refugees plus human rights. It's a lot of things that people don't want to think about. And we will probably continue to succeed in not thinking about many of those things, but some of them, there's no longer going to be a choice. And I think that this is going to be the path to solving them. And I think that groundwork is there and it's happening now. And I remain optimistic about most things.
I love that. How you said the dashboard is going to become more complicated, and it should, and I agree. And those other boxes, though, when you put in refugee crisis, when you put in climate change, like those are the boxes that have real meaning in them, right? That when you move the needle on it, it's not the same as just increasing revenue of your company by 10% next year. It's so much more dimensional than that.
Yeah, and this is the challenge, because you can increase your revenue 10% next year. Can you could you decrease the refugee crisis, which is happening right now? By the way, there is a refugee crisis that people don't think about. Millions of people displaced for years and years.
Largest one of all time.
Yeah, so like, could we decrease that by 10% in the next year? Probably.
Mm-hmm.
Probably, if everyone stood up and said that was a goal, that would be possible. But for some of these things, we also just see them as like so moralistic or black and white. Like, well, if it's here, we don't really want to think about how it's here. So if it's like 5 million people instead of 2 million people, whatever, we're not really thinking about it anyway. And there's a willingness to accept certain things, and especially in the West, especially with the comfort that is that our wealth is used to create for ourselves. And there's no doubt that we're all going to hold on to that comfort as long as we can, and we're going to fight for it with everything we can. Which is why embracing something like decarbonization in a way that, like, let's make everybody's lives better, and that's why we're doing this. We're making our future lives better. We're making our current lives better too, because cleaner air, all these things. That I think that can be a more successful argument potentially. But yeah, but we've reached a rubber meets the road point, and there's going to have to be more action on major, seemingly intractable issues in the next 5 years than there's been in the last 20.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that will happen.
Well, I think another element of that is, which your example on reducing carbon emissions highlights, is the biggest problems that the globe faces can actually be the biggest business opportunities too, if you can figure out a way to solve them. And it's flipping that switch of the way we approach these problems and think about them. Yeah, there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah. I mean, all of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, those are all these targets that are meant to identify can't remember if it's 15 or 17 most urgent needs in the world. You know, yeah, you need those kinds of things. You know, do they work? I think they help, you know, but yeah, we need those kinds of things to create more collective action. But, you know, again, I mean, we're in a funny world where I think more and more employees are going to be like fractional employees, part-time employees, like gig worker life is going to extend to kind of everywhere. And there's going to be this greater, you know, we will define our identity less through our employer, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I think that there's going to be a rise in communalism and communityship. And I think that the web is going to be a part of that. But I think after the internet, we are networked creatures in a way that we're very different than we've been before. And so I think there's just an interesting set of factors that we are the living experiments of right now, and that I think do result in just a fundamentally very different relationships to these questions than, I mean, future people will have than us, you know, just even the next generation will have from us. I mean, I look at Greta Thunberg, and I see her as like, she's probably like a moderate voice sent back from 30 years in the future, right? Like 30 years in the future, she's like moderate. There are people way harder than that. And I just think of her, she's just like a very clear spoken moderate sent back from the future to tell us what's up.
I love that thought.
You know, so you know, as we see with racism, which, you know, we had convinced ourselves was like dissipating, you know, like post 60s had, you know, white America, elite America had told itself was like on a certain way and would just trend to zero given long enough time. You know, we can also see how that's not true,
Mm-hmm.
how far that is from being true, and how what seems like inevitable progress to one person, you know, really might not to someone else. And, you know, and so as we think about the future, we can't lose sight of that. We can't lose sight of the fact that not everyone thinks the way that we think, or not everyone wants the things that we want. And there's, in many cases, that's great, but in other cases, it's, you know, it can be violent. It can be, um, you know, it can be just despair creating. Um, but yeah.
I think that also highlights just with all of these issues that we face, whether it's racism or climate change or the refugee crisis, they're systemic things that need to change. They're like complicated problems, where a lot of different moving pieces to make progress forward. It's not just one thing that's an easy fix. And so, but they're worth the effort to get there. It's just the collective action to create that systemic change and make those steps forward.
There's a great book that just came out by Mariana Mazzucato, who's a phenomenal economist. The book is called Mission Economy, and it's all about um, creating missions within government, within the broader public, and it's really based on the Apollo mission. And Kennedy saying in 1961, we're going to put a man on the moon by the end of this decade. And he had made that goal in consultation with the early leaders of the space program. But still, it was a bold goal that they weren't sure how they were going to complete.
Mm-hmm.
And the fulfillment of that mission required massive public and private investments. That mission created the computer, it created the camera phone, it created tennis shoes, it created, you know, astronaut ice cream, it created GPS, it created the mouse. And these were all spillover inventions of this mission. And, you know, putting a man on the moon wasn't actually like an important mission, right? It's like part of it's about the competition with the Soviet Union, but like that didn't need to happen. That was like there are other reasons for that to happen other than basic survival. You know, Kennedy was speaking to kind of a future us with that. But, you know, something like the climate, you know, the Green New Deal, refactoring our society, like that is something that has real utility. And if presented in the right level of like bold, inspiring, open way, it will create all kinds of things. If handled right, it will create all kinds of things that we could not anticipate. And culture, societies, we respond to these kinds of these forces, these incentives. Where a big pop star goes along and starts wearing something, we all start wearing it. It's fun. It's nice to be led sometimes, and so I think that there is a real opportunity for that level of mission, and the climate is an opportunity like that hasn't existed since World War II, and it demands that kind of all hands on deck response. And it turns out that if you do that well, there's just all sorts of wonderful things and innovations and opportunities and potential for communityship that comes out of that. She has this great story that really encapsulates this in the book. She talks about how in 61 Kennedy went to visit the space station, like where they're going to be launching, as is Cape Canaveral or Houston, and he stopped a janitor and asked the janitor what he was doing. And the janitor said, "Well, Mr. President, I'm sending a man to the moon." And so when we have those kinds of missions, like everything becomes meaningful to this larger purpose, and it's galvanizing, it's exciting, it's fun. It's like what we all want out of
Yeah.
things we do.
Yeah.
And so, I think that's going to be it. I think that's going to define the next 10 to 15 years. And I think that there's going to be a great moral clarity and a lot of hard work and a lot of interesting work and necessary work that's going to happen.
Yeah. That is so inspiring. And it ties back. So when Kennedy made that announcement that we're going to land a man on the moon, it was less than a decade away. And it ties back to what you said earlier with these commitments from businesses. Are they real? Well, it depends on the time frame. Kennedy didn't say we're going to do that in the next generation. He's like, no,
Yeah.
we're going to do that in less than a decade. We don't know how we're going to do it, but we're going to do it.
Yeah, saying less than a decade is saying like it is happening on my watch. It's at least starting on my watch. And yeah, you're absolutely right to connect those things. I think that's right.
Now tell me about Bentoism.
Yeah, so my current project is a framework for decision making and for identifying your true self-interest. And it's a 2x2, so just 4 boxes. And the box in the bottom left is called Now Me, and that represents what I as an individual want and need right now. And the bottom right, there's Future Me, what the older, wiser version of me wants me to do. So like kind of my ideal self. The top left is Now Us, the people in my life who I care about and who care about me. And the top right is Future Us, the world my children will inhabit or that my future self will inhabit. And so the idea is that each of these 4 spaces are in my self-interest. Every decision I make leaves a footprint in these spaces, and these spaces affect me. And what the Bento does, which is an acronym for Beyond Near-Term Orientation, and what the Bento does is it makes these dimensions of life tangible and allows me to form opinions on them, and allows me to make decisions where I explicitly think about what my future self might want me to do, or I incorporate directly into my thinking like what the key people in my life like might say about something. And so I use my Bento to make every decision. I use it to set my weekly priorities. Each week I draw a blank Bento and write out like my week's Now Me goals. So like my work things I have to do, my Future Me goals for that week, which will be my future self, like telling me to be patient or to continue some longer practice, my Now Us, every week I write down who in my life I want to spend time with that week, who I need to call. So I like make my plan of who I'm going to reach out to. And then Future Us, for the things that I care about, what can I do in the next 7 days to positively contribute to those things. So how can I give my time to something political, or to learn something, or to share something, or expose myself to, in some way? And so that grounds how I spend my time each week. And so the bento is it's a kind of a UI, a user interface for making decisions. And then it's also a community of people. I run a group called the Bento Society that has a couple hundred members, thousands, a couple thousand people on a mailing list. And these are all folks who use this tool to make decisions and who are part of a community together where we meet each week and do fun stuff. So, yeah.
I love that. It's like a decision making compass that's balanced.
Yeah, it's I think of it as a kind of a mental scaffolding that just organizes your thoughts and makes sure that you are just really seeing things from these core perspectives. And the deeper you go with that, there's just so many utilities for it, and in so many ways so many things you learn about yourself. So I like really, I'm at 3 years of using this to sort of guide my decisions and to think about what I'm doing. And like every week, I really am discovering a different way to think about it, or just, through some self-inquiry, revealing something, or using it as an experiment in different situations. I've really found so much life in it. And what is like a very simple thing, just 4 boxes. The beauty of the bento is it's about as simple as you can get. 4 boxes to remember: now me, future me, now us, future us. And you start thinking that way, and you just get to learn who those people are, because we have those different parts of ourselves. That, like the best way I can explain this is if you think about a smoker and they ask their bento, should I quit smoking? And so they use the bento, the smoker asks each box individually to see what it has to say. So the smoker's now us, which thinks of their friends and family, says, yeah, quit. We don't want you to smoke. The smoker's future us says, yeah, quit. Like, what if your kid smokes because of you? The smoker's future me says, yeah, quit. Like, I want there to be a future me. But the smoker's now me says, hell no, don't quit smoking. I'm addicted to nicotine. Like, this is going to suck. Don't do this to me. And you know what? Every one of those boxes is right. No one is wrong there.
Mm-hmm.
They all have their specific perspective. And the place where a lot of us get stuck, it happens to all of us, is that we have a hard time seeing beyond now me. We have this very sort of passive lens on the world. We just see what's right in front of us, and it's harder to see the longer term, or to see this bigger picture. And it is harder to do that, right? We all struggle to do it. I certainly do. And so the bento is here as just this dead simple tool to make it less hard to think about those things. Doesn't make it easy, but it makes it less hard to really sort through what's going on for yourself, and to create, like, the ultimate end result is you create more coherent decisions. It's like your choices add up to something, and it's not just this like randomness of life. You find a direction, and you learn how to make every decision, and really every day add to that direction.
I love that. It's not the randomness of life. It's a framework to be intentional about what you decide to do and aware of why you're deciding to do it. So, like, the smoker can say, I am going to choose to keep smoking right now because I'm going to weight my now me more heavily than those other boxes. But at least being aware of what you're doing and what self-interest you're not supporting through your decision.
Sure. Yeah, definitely.
I love that. I'm curious what role you think, as you think about businesses, that they can play in helping create a more generous future.
Well, they're a piece of the picture. I think one thing they can do is they can take up less space. I think that I think that business has an incredibly important role to serve, but we shouldn't want businesses to be acting as governments, I think I would like to see businesses that are really exceptional at what they do, who pay their employees well so that their employees are able to make decisions that make sense for their lives, and not out of desperation. And that, they pay their taxes and that they ensure that responsible leaders are democratically elected. That's what a business leader can do to create a more generous world. It's not solving it on your own. It's not like building the app that's the solution. It's accepting that you're a part of a larger picture and really embracing that role and taking it just as like something you have to treat with real respect. And that's what makes a better world. And that's true for all of us, and um, but yeah, more and more, I think, we want to have solutions come from every corner. And we don't want to have this assumption that all solutions must come in the container of a corporation. In some cases, that will need to be the case, but it doesn't always have to be. And so I think business being great at what it does, delivering products, uniting a group of people, a team together around, putting something into the world, like those are amazing things. Like I absolutely love those things. I love them, deeply. Um, and then leave the rest to other people, just be good at that, and be mindful of not just the money you're making, but also what you're leaving behind.
Mm.
And so, yeah, these are not easy things, and they require a different mentality than we're taught to have today. But it is one that is absolutely accessible to every leader and can be developed. And the world is transitioning us there anyway. And I think we have to be a bridge to that next world. And that's what this period right now is.
I love that, being a bridge to the next world, because it focuses on thinking long term, which is so important. And that does encompass the other side of the Bentoism matrix, the short term and the long term, and the importance of both of those and how they interact and play together and can support each other.
Yeah, definitely.
This has been an amazing conversation, and I know we're running out of time. Are there any last thoughts that you want to share?
No, I just appreciate getting the chance to talk with you, and yeah, thanks for the great conversation.
I love what you're doing. The thoughts that you're putting out in the world are so needed. Where can people find you?
You can find me at ystrickler.com, and then you can learn more about Bentoism at bentoism.org.
Awesome. I'll put those in show notes. And also a call out again, your book is called This Could Be Our Future, a Manifesto for a More Generous World. And it is just a phenomenal read. So highly recommend.
All right. Thanks so much, Kathy.
Thank you so much, Yancey. Bye.